Hello and welcome to this PIR live event brought to you by Partners in Research Canada. My name is Stacey Joyce and I will be your host. Please remember that you can ask questions anytime during the event. If you're joining us live, just click chat in the top left-hand corner of your screen. Make sure your to field is set to everyone or set to include attendees. And then type out your question. We'll be sure to queue it up and ask it when it is time. So no need to wait on your part. Also, make sure you include your name, your school, or your city so that we can give you a shout out when we ask your question. And let's begin. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our guest, Dr. Mathew Leitch. He is a professor of wood science and forestry products at the Faculty of Natural Resources Management at Lakehead University. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Stacey. Okay. All right, so as Stacey mentioned, my name is Dr. Mathew Leitch. I'm from Lakehead University in the Natural Resources Management, and today I'm going to discuss some of the work we're doing here on inherent wood property mapping, which is looking at the internal properties of wood and how we can better utilize the forest resource. So just a quick introduction. Canada, of course, forestry has been a long-standing industry in this country, and we have very vast resources. Some numbers: Canada has just under 400,000 hectares of forest lands, which is one of the bigger chunks of forest in the world. It's roughly 60% made up of softwood trees, about 16% mixed wood, which is softwood and hardwoods, and then about 11% is hardwoods. Ownership is provincially very high. 77%, territorial about 13%, private 6%, and then Aboriginal, federal, and municipal about 4%. On average, we harvest about 700 to 750,000 hectares a year across Canada, which seems like a lot, but if you look at the amount of land we have, it's actually a very small percentage. We lose or have damaged about 20 million hectares a year to bugs, and fire can be up to 4 or 5 million hectares a year. The industry itself is a big contributor to Canada financially. It's about $20 billion a year to our gross domestic product. And then revenue from manufactured goods is about $53 billion. Plus the industry employs just under 300,000 people in the country. So it's a significant contributor to Canada and has been for a long time. So as you can see here, Canada is made up of several forest types, being a very large country, right from tundra in the north to grasslands in the prairies, the boreal forest that circumnavigates the entire planet. Canada has a large chunk of that. And then in southern Ontario, some of eastern Canada, we have mixed hardwood forests that are predominantly found in the United States. So when we look at wood property mapping and how we use trees, wood property mapping is actually looking at the natural variability we find in trees, both within a species and then across species and across landscapes. So what we've developed is a method to look at variability from the middle of the tree out to the bark, from the bottom of the tree to the top, which is axial variability, morphology, which is differences we see in the type of growth inside a tree, so from young to old, and then the effect of knots and areas of the tree that don't have knots, clear wood. Put all that together and that equals basically whole tree mapping. So one of the problems with trees, of course, is they grow across the landscape in many different environments, which causes the trees to grow differently. So part of our problem was, of course, to recognize that variability and be able to map it such that we can use trees more efficiently and literally at the end of the day, get more out of each tree, meaning we can potentially cut fewer trees. So the way we did it is, obviously, in order to study trees, you have to cut some down. And we used initially destructive methods, which were very labor intensive, obviously, where we harvest a lot of trees, we break them down. As you can see in these pictures, there's going to the bush, bringing them back, putting them on portable milling operations that we have, keep sawing it down until at the very end, you have it going on the testing machines following international standards for how we look at wood. So this is a method we developed where we basically mark every piece of wood from the middle of the tree, which is the pith, all the way out to the bark and in every direction. And that allows us to very accurately map the properties of the tree. And with that, of course, we know what we can do with the wood, and we can assign the highest value products to it, which at the end of the day is our best way to remain a strong industry, is to recognize what we have and utilize it to its best ability. So this just shows a picture of a study we did with Larch. This was a master's student at the time, to sort of say the labor intensive component. This one project alone, we processed over 17,000 samples in order to produce our maps. So it's a very intensive program, but allows us to very accurately produce maps. So again, we can better utilize the resource we have. So with that intensive testing, we came up with methods that weren't so labor intensive, and that was using technology such as acoustics, which is as a pulse. By hitting these little units that we plug into the tree, you hit it and it's a time of flight pulse. So how long it takes the pulse to go from one unit to the receiver. And with that distance, the density or the weight of the tree is affected, and so it gives us a good idea. That combined with these cores that you see on the right side of the screen allows us to do predictive modeling. So we can predict what the properties in the tree will be. And that's based again on the fact that we've done so much intensive destructive sampling. So we can correlate in and out and up and down the tree. So this just shows some of the work we do with these. We take these cores, we measure them out. It shows on the left all the different growth rings. Then the fiber analysis on the bottom right is a machine that tells us about the fibers themselves, how long they are, how wide they are, which indicates the quality. And then the X-ray densitometer is a machine that gives us density profiles. And all these combined allow us to create maps that I'll show here in a second. And one of the nice things about using the acoustics is if you look on the left of this screen, the AC velocity, it's the green bar. It's highly related to many other properties that we measure. So when we get, like the specific gravity is density, when we get that profile, we can measure or predict properties from pith to bark, top to bottom, based on these simple measurements now. So that's where we're at with this stage. And literally, in order to handle all of this, what we've had to do is develop an app. It seems everybody has an app nowadays. Well, we developed a wood science app, and it essentially allows us to collect information both in the field and in the labs. All the machines are wirelessly connected to this, and it allows our data to be controlled. Being as we produce so much data, we needed a means of controlling it and to produce our maps. So our app actually takes all our data, and with a 3D function, will produce maps. Okay, so it basically, this system, it allows us to join multiple computers, field tablets, and everything else to enable us to look at wood in a more detailed manner. And this also allows us, when we're traveling, to share with partners, which is a big part of our research, is working with other groups and industry. So everybody has access to it under secure secure sites, and it allows us to transfer data and to research together, which is very valuable in this day and age, especially with secure sites. So these are some of the maps that our Wood Science app will produce. So these are three-dimensional. They can spin on the computer screen, so you can look at the differences in the tree properties along its length. And then the outcome of this, of course, is to better understand what's in the tree. So on the far right of the screen, you can see it's to optimize how we break trees down. So we get the highest quality, the best value out of every log, and we send it to the mill, which will utilize it to its fullest degree. Okay, so what the results have shown is what we sort of hoped, is there's obviously between species property differences and across sites. And this is how we've based our whole mapping system, is site differences. So if you look at the landscape, you can see there's hills, and then there's areas that are low. The low areas tend to be moist. The top of the hills tend to be a bit drier. Trees respond to that very quickly, and all our results show that this is how the trees are responding. And so we've used that as the basis for some of our landscape maps. So these are just some pictures showing what we can produce. So if you look at density or microfibril angle, which is part of the cell wall, or strength properties, how strong wood is. So I'm sure most, even the younger kids, you've seen framing in your parents' house, either floors or roofs. We have to have certain strength properties in those products in order to make sure that your house is safe for you to live in. Okay, so what these show, these general maps show, is that where the variability is in the tree and how we can capitalize on that variability. You can see in the strength, for example, the higher strength is on the outside of the tree, which is considered more mature wood, whereas the core of the tree is very juvenile and it's much lower in strength. So we don't want that to be the one holding your roof up, for example. Okay, these are more macro scale maps. They show across the landscape. So this is northwestern Ontario, above Lake Superior, and it shows clearly that we do have variability, and these are density maps showing the variability across the landscape for a particular species. So again, depending where it's growing, trees grow differently, and so we can manage for that, and we can accommodate that in how we use the wood. And this is outputs from the app, is again showing on the left morphology, so mature wood or juvenile wood, the difference being when trees are young, they produce that juvenile wood. As they age and get bigger, they need wood to keep them upright and strong, so it's mature wood. So mills need to know what the proportion of that is and where it is in the tree so they can optimize how they saw trees up. On the right side, you can see it produces maps of moisture content variability in the tree. This is important for how we process wood, and particularly how we dry it. This slide is one that is obviously of very high interest to industry. What it does show is that trees are quite variable in their properties, and the main property variability comes from the juvenile and mature wood. So you can see the core of the tree on the right side is of low grade, number 4 in pulp. And the higher that number is, the lower the grade, the lower the number. So number 2 and better, or number 1, is very strong wood. So we need to know this because this is how we sell wood. And so if we can find areas that have the best wood, that's what we need for construction. The lower quality wood we can make pulp and paper out of. So to understand where it is on the landscape means that we can have better reaction to market demand. Plus we can be more attractive when trying to attract new investment, because we can tell people what we have and where it is and where the wood is that they particularly need for a particular product. And what this looks like on a landscape, this is a map, and you can see the colored area that's in the middle with the orange and the yellow and the sort of beige around it. That was considered one forest type. Each one of these colored areas are polygons. Well, we remapped this area and showed that it's about 4 different forest types. So our map system is very accurate, and it's something that the Ontario government is looking at to improve their forest resource inventory using a system that we have. So this will allow us to, one, have a better idea of what's on the landscape, and to better feed our mills and attract new investment to the region. So this again shows that map. It's got optimized roads laid out onto it, plus critical habitat. That could be wildlife habitat, it could be critical sensitive forest types, or ground vegetation, and that can be worked into the plan so that we don't disturb those areas. And the idea behind all this, of course, is to develop tools that help industry and help the environment so that we manage it in a much better way to satisfy what society needs, but also what the environment needs to stay strong and healthy. And everything we've done shows that our system does work, and it's beneficial to foresters, manufacturers, and end users to match the end-use design criteria with the resource attributes, which basically says we know what's in the forest, so we know how to make the best products from that resource. And this just shows a couple products, a couple of last slides here to say where we're moving. You can see, like, top left, extremely gorgeous, using different woods for furniture. The top middle is a biorefinery, where we're extracting chemicals from the pulp and paper industry that are very valuable. Obviously making new paper products, the big glue lamp, pictures in the bottom middle and the top right middle. These are large pieces of wood glued together to make big spans. That soccer stadium in the bottom middle, that's a 275-foot span that's made out of wood. And then the bottom right is one of the newer products. It's cross-laminated timber. It's essentially plywood on steroids. It has 2-inch by 6-inch pieces of wood glued together to make a strong panel. And I'll get to that in a second. You can see this building in the top left is a glue lamp, or CLT, cross-laminated timber building, so they're very quick to put up and they're very strong. On the bottom left is nanocellulose, using a chemical from wood to make car components and even bulletproof vests for military and stuff like that. Obviously, wood is used heavily in energy now, so for heating and electricity, which is a big area for the forest industry now. And then things such as instruments, new mountain bikes made of wood. This car on the bottom right is called the Splinter, and it's mostly a wood supercar that'll do in excess of 200 miles an hour, just to show how much wood can be used in various different products. And then this is some of these using that cross-laminated timber. There's been buildings designed that are now 30 stories. Green Karsh is architects out of Vancouver, and he's a big proponent of wood utilization. In Switzerland, they've designed a 36-story wood structure. Currently, the tallest wood structure is an 18-story that's built in Vancouver at the UBC campus, and it's made of cross-laminated timber. So this is becoming a big part of the industry, and it's great for the environment because, of course, wood sequesters carbon. And so by using wood in buildings, we're actually promoting cleaning of the environment, because it will hold that carbon, and it means that we're growing and planting trees, which will keep sequestering and producing clean air for the planet. And with that, that's basically my short little webinar on how to map trees in order for us to better utilize them. This last slide just shows some of the groups that have sponsored me, and of course my little darling Huskies.
Well, thank you so much for introducing us, I think, a little bit more deeply into this industry that's obviously very important for Canada. We have questions pouring in while you were giving your presentation. So lots of kids wondering about lots of things. So if you can go ahead and click the red stop share button. Our first question is from Grace at Rolfe Road Public School in Toronto. Grace is wondering, what is the most difficult thing about forestry?
Well, there's a variety of things. Probably the biggest issue for the industry is the fact that our trees are spread across the landscape. And so we have to go physically through the woods, road building and everything else to access the resource. And it's across a large tract of land, unlike, say, mining, where you have a single location. So, I mean, that's a big part of the industry. In Canada, we're very good at what we do. We have the best forest practices on the planet, so we're very good at doing this. But probably the biggest aspect of forestry is going to the woods to actually get the trees out of the woods to our mills.
And let's go next to Brody. Brody is also in Toronto. He's wondering, what is the hardest house to make from wood?
The hardest house?
I don't know if he means hardest or most difficult. So maybe we can answer each of those questions.
Well, the hardest one to make out of wood probably would be one that's in extreme environments, just because of the nature of wood being a material that can be, broken down by various activities. So, the far north or something like that, or extreme wet conditions are difficult, because you have to do particular things to the wood in order for it to withstand those. And what was the next part to that?
Just, so that's maybe what's the most difficult. He said hardest, and I'm not sure if he means the actual hardness of the wood. So maybe what is the hardest wood you could use for building a house?
Well, we typically use softwoods because of the nature of their strength properties. They're not the hardest woods on the planet. Softwoods, as the name suggests, are fairly soft. But that's mostly what we use, and we tend to use ones that will take nails and screws and stuff like that quite easily. We don't use harder woods. One, they're heavy, and two, they don't take nails and screws easily. So we use fairly soft woods that are strong but easy to use.
Gotcha. Next, I'd like to go to a question from Ellery at McMurrich Public School. She's wondering, where in Canada is the strongest wood found?
Actually, we're pretty fortunate because, as you noticed at the beginning, the boreal forest runs pretty much from coast to coast. Um, we have fairly similar strength properties across a lot of our woods, but probably some of the strongest wood might be things like Douglas fir in BC, just because of its cellular makeup. It has exceptionally strong properties. It's always been prized as a strong wood. Um, that's probably one of our better ones, but we also have things like Sitka spruce that are light but strong. So it depends on the product. They used to make airplanes out of Sitka spruce. It's a very light and strong wood, but then there's also heavier woods that are very strong, like Doug fir, that's good for like bridge construction and, you know, structural members in buildings. So it varies, and we use wood all across the country. Everything is used based on standards. So the wood we use is strong enough for everything, all the service we put it into.
Excellent. Just a quick reminder to those who are joining us live, as you're asking questions, please make sure you are adjusting your to field so that it includes everyone or all attendees. We just have a bunch of similar questions coming in, so I'll try to make sure I get to those, because we've got classes across the gamut all asking the same things. So the next one is from Ms. Tibshirani's grade 7s at All Saints in Ottawa. And they are wondering how many trees people cut down in a year. Maybe we could talk about just Canada. I'm not sure if you have worldwide stats on lumber. So how many trees are cut down in Canada in a year?
We harvest about 700 to 750,000 hectares a year. You can have upwards 1,000 to 2,000 trees per hectare. Probably between 500 and 1,500 is more accurate at mature wood. So, I mean, you do the math, it's a lot of trees. In Canada, it's a very small percentage of what we have. I mean, we manage it so that we will always have trees and we'll always have forests. That's part of our strategy. Worldwide, it's very difficult because there's a lot of areas where there's illegal logging, nobody has an idea of how much is being cut. Canada, we're very fortunate in that we have the best practices on the planet and the least illegal logging, if any, compared to other countries. So on a world scale, it's difficult to say the number, just because a lot of people don't tell how much they cut, or they don't know how much is being cut. In Canada, we have a very good control over that. So, you know, you take the hectares basis and you multiply it out by the approximate number, and that'll give you a close or a rough number how many actual trees we cut.
So in a similar direction here, Rachel and Shelby at Rolfe Road are wondering how many new trees grow per year. And maybe I'll contrast that with our question from Charlotte at McMurrich, who's asking, is it true that for every tree cut down, 2 are planted?
Pretty much. I mean, we do in Canada, we're very good at regeneration. You have planting, but then in most parts of Canada, we have very good natural regeneration. So even if we didn't plant, we'd have fully stocked forest coming back just from the seed that's available from the former forest. So pretty much for every tree we cut, we do plant a couple, and then there's lots of natural regen. So we're very good at maintaining our forests and ensuring that there will be future forests.
Excellent. And Ben at McMurrich is wondering, how does gluing wood make it stronger than a single piece of wood?
Gluing is, and I mean, it's a big part of the industry now. If you glue 2 pieces of wood together, it more than doubles the strength of each individual piece because of the nature of them being glued together and how that glue line affects the strength properties. So in big beams like that, you can take, you know, this cross-laminated timber. It can be up to 9 or 11 pieces thick of 2x6s. So that's a fairly significant piece of wood. Gluing the pieces together, again, it increases the connection between things, and so it increases the strength. And that's right from big pieces of wood down to things where we have strands of wood that we glue together into make big pieces. Part of the reason we're doing that is, 1, to make bigger members that we couldn't make from a standing tree, and 2, to utilize pieces of wood that may not be strong enough, but by gluing them together, it makes a much superior product. So the nature of the glue combined with the fiber makes very strong products.
It's nice to see innovation even in an industry that is so long-standing. I just have a clarification question here from Rolf Road. They're just wondering if you can explain how large is a hectare?
A hectare is an acre, which is the old measurement, is 200 feet by 200 feet. And there's 2.5 acres in a hectare.
So maybe an average schoolyard might be a hectare or
Pretty
two?
close, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a question from Findley who's wondering, what is the most common type of tree? Let's go in Canada. What's the most common type of tree in Canada?
Probably would be the spruces. As a family group would be spruce. An individual tree would probably be black spruce, because it grows coast to coast. Black spruce, or in the softwoods, and white birch in the hardwoods. Both of those species grow from the east coast to the west coast. Things like sugar maple that you see all across Ontario do not grow in the west. They grow down east, but their range ends pretty much in Ontario, or close to Ontario, Manitoba. So black spruce and white birch pretty much grow coast to coast. So they're probably the more prominent species on the landscape.
I think we take for granted in Ontario and Quebec how common those sugar maples are for our maple syrup.
Yeah.
I knew someone who moved out to BC, and it's actually very expensive and difficult to come by, even within Canada, because they just don't grow there.
Pretty much from Ontario to the east coast, you'll get sugar maple, but not out west.
And an interesting question here from Elliot at McMurrich. Elliot's wondering, how do you make a controlled forest fire? And what is the purpose of having a controlled forest fire?
Forest fire, we used to do a lot more of that than we currently do. After we harvest areas, we would burn them. And you can control it by putting breaks around the perimeter, meaning you expose mineral soil so it can't burn. And you also obviously have on standby airplanes and what have you in case something happens. But we can control it quite well. At certain times a year we will burn. The main reason for doing it is by burning some of the debris on the ground, it releases nutrients. So there's a flush of nutrients in the soil when the new forest comes back. And then for other species such as jack pine, or out west its relative lodgepole pine, they're actually fire origin species, meaning that their cones are what they refer to as serotinous, and they require high temperatures, which typically fire will give, for the cones to open and release the seeds. So there's certain species that are very adapted to fire, and then fire releases nutrients from the biomass that's left on site, which of course puts a flush of nutrients in the soil for the new crop of trees to access.
Very interesting. I don't think that's terribly intuitive. We always think of a forest fire as a bad thing, but if you control it, it seems to have some benefits, as you explained.
Most forest ecosystems require fire for their regeneration in order to sustain themselves. So fire is a big part of most forest ecosystems.
Well, we are getting toward the end of our time here. I do want to get to another question or two, and I've been saving a couple up here. We've had a question from Shyla at Holly Meadows Elementary in Barrie, and a similar question from our class in Priestville, Saskatchewan, that is going to watch this recording later. They want to know how you became interested in lumber and forestry.
I, like a lot of forestry students, and we ask our students every year about this, but I mean, as a kid, I grew up in a small town in southern Ontario. I was always playing in the woods. I've always liked trees. I like the outdoors, so forestry seemed like a pretty obvious path for me, just because of my love of the outdoors. And so that's basically why I got into it, and it's been good ever since.
And how did you train to get where you are today? What was your sort of path?
Well, I went to university. I went to University of New Brunswick, did a bachelor's in science forestry there, and then a master of science in forestry. after working a few years, and then when I finished my master's, I was offered to go to Australia, where I did my doctorate at Melbourne University in Australia, and then I worked there for about 10 years, researching and teaching wood science. And yeah, I've just always had an interest and fascination with wood, and you know, the beauty of it and how variable each piece is. So I mean, I'm an active woodworker. I make furniture and everything, so I really like playing with wood.
And maybe a broad question to finish off about the industry. Where do you see our Canadian lumber industry going, or maybe what changes do you think need to be implemented to keep us going strong?
Well, I mean, the industry is starting to make changes now, which is good. Obviously, the newer engineered wood products is an area that we can definitely delve into, and we are in certain parts of Canada. Other parts are catching up to that as well. In our pulp and paper, there's obviously lots of opportunities there. In Thunder Bay, we have a biorefinery in our pulp mill, and it's extracting very valuable chemicals. Trees are essentially chemical factories. So there's lots of opportunities in different areas that traditionally, you know, we produce pulp and paper and lumber to the world. We still do that, but then we're more getting into value adding, you know, secondary processing, utilizing species we haven't used in the past. So just a more rounded industry that's, I think, will be more sustainable, and it opens the door for us producing higher value products, which typically means more jobs. And in, you know, as far as forestry is concerned, we have very good foresters in the country. It's an area where we have always need more people. Out of our programs here, we have 100% employment at graduation into high-paying jobs, because there's a very high demand for professional foresters, and it is a professional degree. We all get a little ring with a tree on it that you get at graduation, and you become like an engineer in a couple of years, a registered professional forester, which your signature becomes a legal document, and you write contracts and so on and so forth. So it's an industry that's always been here, and I think it always will be here, because it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a totally renewable industry. You know, certain industries, when we run out of the resource, we're going to run out of the resource, whereas we can continually plant trees. It's a building material that has been used forever and will continue to be, and more so now with new engineered products. So there's a lot of opportunities for, you know, entrepreneurial people and for the industry to keep growing and still be a major part of Canada's economy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. That is all the time we have. So thank you, Dr. Leitch, for giving us that insight and answering our questions. We had so many questions I couldn't get to. I apologize. I tried to get to as many as I could. But please do join us again for more PIR live events, including our next webinars on mental health and animal communication, especially songbirds. So more information and a full schedule are available at pirweb.org. Have a great day, everyone.